When we started to plan out the patient forum, the content that we wanted to cover, the speakers who we wanted to present it, our minds immediately went to the many research advances that have happened over the last 3 or 4 years. We've had a lot of those advances, and frankly, sometimes it's hard to pick and choose what we want to cover. The science candy, as we like to call it at MRA, gets us all very excited. However, it's also really important that we not forget the incredible expertise that comes directly from the melanoma community itself, in its patients, its survivors, and its caregivers. It's these people and their insight that we'll be exploring here during this panel. Together, we'll discuss issues such as getting up to speed following a diagnosis, advocating for yourself and your loved ones, improving communication between you and your care team, quality of life and how to keep it as high as possible, and finding the community. I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves, where they're from, how melanoma came into their life, and how things are doing today.
Hi, I'll start. I am JB Ward, and I live in Nashville currently. And I am a vaginal mucosal melanoma survivor. So my diagnosis came January 2016. And after the first resection, it was sort of a wait period, and then it returned pretty quickly. And I spent about a year with different things, kind of a roller coaster there, trying to get it in check, and ultimately post-immunotherapy, which was actually fairly successful for me, which is surprising for mucosal. I had a surgery as part of a TIL trial that actually was curative without me having to complete the TIL trial. And it's been about 5 years since I've been NED. And now I'm working as a patient advocate. Thanks.
I'm Amy Jardin. I live in eastern Iowa. I was diagnosed in February of 2015 with acral melanoma. It was a spot between my toes, stage 1A, and I've done the 3 months with oncologists and dermatologists, and I've been no evidence of disease since.
I'm Christine Garrison. I come at melanoma from the caregiver's perspective. My journey with melanoma began in 2005 when my daughter was diagnosed at the age of 27. She went through subsequently 3 clinical trials, 2 vaccine trials, and 1 BRAF trial, which gave her really pretty good quality of life for about 6 years. Then developed brain metastases, and we lost her in November of 2011. Since then, I've become an advocate, and that's what brings me here today.
Thank you. You don't know what you don't know. And this is something that I think we've all said, we've all kind of shouted, gotten a little angry about, just because when you're facing melanoma, there are just so many things that you don't know yet. How have you all handled that and getting up to speed?
I mean, when I was diagnosed with mucosal melanoma, there was a lot of head scratching, not just on my end, but also from my providers, so that was fun. It's a little disorienting when the providers you have don't really know what's going on, because mine was found at my OB-GYN. So I'm a researcher, I did research as part of my degree, so I really just dove right in, and I feel like I gained a PhD in mucosal melanoma in about a month and just really got all the information. Google was not a great place to look when I was starting out, but PubMed and looking at some of the melanoma programs online that had some actual good data on there. So really just for me, my personal way of doing that was just deep dive in research.
For me, I got a phone call from the nurse who stumbled over words before melanoma, and it would be another year before I realized it was acral melanoma as a specific and distinct form. So really for the first year, I was just following what my doctors and oncologists said. I was trying not to Google things because they always say like that's a bad thing to do. And I thought, well, I'm trusting in my care team. And I actually ended up changing oncologists. So I had gone to the same oncology office, and the first oncologist moved out of state. Then I saw a nurse practitioner, then I saw another oncologist who, on my first visit with her, told me I needed to check my lymph nodes every day. And then I was like, what? Well, maybe weekly. And I said, what? And she goes, well, maybe monthly. And I was like, I'm done. So I called my primary care doctor office who had done the biopsy, and I said, I need a referral to the melanoma specialist in the state. And they said, why? I said, because I should have been referred there from the get-go. And there at the melanoma specialist oncology office, I felt like I came home. I mean, I just felt like these people understood. They knew what acro was. They explained stuff to me. I just felt like that's what I needed to do. My care changed a little bit. Instead of just having blood work done, I also had a chest x-ray done every year for some things. So a little bit more understanding of where my medical history was before acro. And yeah.
And JB, as someone who also faced a rare melanoma subtype, do you relate to that? Like just the confusion and frustration that must have felt?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I say I feel like I got a PhD in it, but it got to the point where I felt like I knew more than my providers locally. So I did end up seeking out some outside people that were at actually at a melanoma center. I went to MD Anderson and got a second opinion. And yes, when I went there, it was a totally different experience. This person had seen it before. And I walked in there and I said, I've already gotten the bad news, and she started to talk and I realized maybe it's not as bad as I had been told. So yes, it was just a very different experience.
And Christine, how about you and Rebecca as a caregiver? Was it?
When we found out that Rebecca was diagnosed with melanoma, all I knew about melanoma was bad. I knew nothing else. She was diagnosed at stage 3 and had surgery, and when the surgery, the pathology results came back, we were told that she had clean edges and no evidence that the cancer had spread to her lymph nodes, so we were like, hooray, we're done with melanoma, she's cured. It wasn't until she really went to an oncologist a few weeks later that we found out that, well, no, she had about a 50-50 chance. Maybe it would never come back, but maybe it would come back. And if it came back, it would probably be in some vital organ and kill her. So that was the point at which we knew we had to learn more about melanoma. And fortunately, my husband's a researcher, so he could get onto the internet and he could research clinical trials and understand the ins and outs of them. My daughter's husband had a really strong network of people, so he could reach out and find not just an oncologist, but an oncologist who was an expert in melanoma. And we went from there, and that was really the turning point for us.
And I want to come back to something that Amy, you had said, and this also came up in our prep call, and frankly, it comes up in many of the interviews that I have with people going through melanoma. And it's the idea that maybe this isn't okay, and really kind of discovering the need to advocate for yourself. And Amy, can you talk us through, like, how did you put those pieces together and realize that you deserved more and had to kind of fight for yourself a little bit?
I have had previous cancer advocacy with my mom and sister, and I thought something's not adding up. So I remember going to my first appointment with the oncologist, and she wanted to know what everything was and what my toe looked like. And I said, well, I haven't had the wide lesion excision yet. She was like, why are you here then? Which I did what the doctors from the previous episode said not to do, and I delayed my wide lesion so I could run a race. So I could get into Marine Corps Marathon, which was important. Priorities. But I also think that had it been more advanced, my doctors probably would have said, no, that's not okay to do. I did run it past them. So my second time I was at the oncologist's office, she was over at the computer doing some things, and I said, what stage am I? And she just went really still and rotated around, and she said, nobody's told you? And I was just like, oh, great. Like, what are you guys not telling me? And then she said, you're stage 1A. And I was like, oh, what do I need to do? And she said, you know, just these basic things, we'll be following you. And I said, okay. But it was the follow-up appointments after that oncologist had left the office that just kind of left me wanting something more. Like, I felt like I wasn't getting really good answers, and I didn't understand why. But even throughout that year, I didn't understand that my melanoma was different. Nobody had explained that to me. And I finally decided this is not okay for me to walk out of the oncology office with a queasy stomach and not feeling like I'm getting what I need to know. And, you know, it was just in small town Iowa, it is just like one basic oncology office is treating lots of things. And so I felt really empowered to say, I need to see the melanoma specialist.
That's great. That's great. And Christine, as a caregiver, as a mom, a parent, how did you advocate for Rebecca while still respecting her autonomy and wishes throughout the process?
Rebecca was pretty good at advocating for herself. So my role was primarily support, and it was important for me to remember that melanoma is one of those things that just throws you for a loop, and there's very little, lots of times you don't have much of a sense of control when you're dealing with melanoma. So it was important for her to be able to make as many decisions as she could for herself. And she was able to do that, and so my role was really to put my own need to try and control the situation aside and really support her.
And JB, I know you do a lot of advocacy, you speak with a lot of patients, you're involved with the Rare Registry. Are there any strategies or tips, and I'd also love to hear from Amy and Christine as well, like specific things that folks can keep in mind to advocate for themselves and get the answers that they need?
Yeah, you know, a couple times when I was with my local oncologist who was not a specialist, there were 2 times that basically he told me no, and that didn't feel right for me. So really at that point it was just about following that intuition that something wasn't right when I was being told no. One was, you know, well, your survival rate's, you know, 5% in 5 years. Treatment might bump it a little bit, but we really wouldn't recommend treatment moving it that, you know, much of a little bit, and that didn't feel right at all. So getting a second opinion from that intuition that no wasn't okay really helped, and, you know, gave me more options. And later, out of ease, I was trying to get my treatments back at home as well, same provider. And my, you know, liver enzymes went really high because I was on immunotherapy. And I did a steroid taper. You know, my liver enzymes were still a little high, and he said no again. He said, we have to take you off. And again, that no felt not okay. So, you know, reached back out to MD Anderson, and I wasn't told no. I was told, okay, well, let's be creative here. And I feel like for me, finding the care that, you know, it's not just a hard no, that you feel like you can actually get options and have creativity and, you know, let's think outside the box. And they were wonderful there. And I ended up having a surgery, and it kind of makes me laugh to think, but they'd never done anything like that before, and they were willing to do that. You know, they had a intraoperative radiation going on at the same time, and like, sure, it's wrapped around an artery, let's get someone in there. So big team, and you know, just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean you can't push and try something new.
Any concrete things, Christine, that you'd add?
Yep.
Follow your intuition and don't be afraid to ask for a second opinion.
Well, when my daughter was first noticed that there was something wrong, she actually noticed that a mole had changed on her back, and she went to see a dermatologist. And this was in Miami, where one would think dermatologist would be familiar with melanoma, but he told her, oh, that's fine. It's just a mole growing on top of another mole, nothing to worry about. Being 27 years old, she breathed a sigh of relief and went home and waited another 6 months until one day she happened to be in front of a full-length mirror, saw her back, and saw that this mole had grown to about the size of a dime. The dermatologist had said, well, I could take it off, but you're young, so go to a plastic surgeon instead. That way it won't really leave a scar. So she went to a plastic surgeon to have the mole removed. He took one look at it and said, this is not right. This needs to come off right away. And it was actually the plastic surgeon rather than the dermatologist who diagnosed her correctly and got an oncologist, a surgical oncologist involved in her case and did what needed to be done to diagnose her correctly and remove the melanoma.
That's great. And Amy, I want to come back to something that you mentioned. I also grew up in rural America where things just look a little different, and asking for a second opinion, and then you said state specialist. So I'm curious, how far did you have to drive? What was that like?
I drive about 100 miles one way. So in Iowa, that's like 100 minutes. Not out here where it could be 5 minutes for half a mile. For me, it's not that far because it's still in eastern Iowa. And I have thought if I was still living in western Iowa, maybe I would be going to Nebraska, to Omaha instead, just because of the distance and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Another theme that comes out during conversations that came out during our prep call is the idea of blaming yourself, blaming your parents, guilt, and even the fallacy of the right and proper cancer victim, that some people don't deserve cancer, while maybe some others do, and we know that's not true. Like we know that it's biology and weird and wondrous things. But did any of you blame yourself for what had happened, and how did you overcome that?
I know Rebecca went back over her life and looked at any time she was very fair-skinned and redheaded and had a few burns in her life and really did go back and say, oh, well, I shouldn't have gotten that burn, and maybe that's why I got the melanoma. As a mother, I felt quite guilty. I mean, I did my best to slather her in sunscreen, keep hats on her, keep her in the shade when she was young, but I did, there were a couple of times when she did get burned, and then my question was, well, could I have stopped that? And then the other thing that I blamed myself for was, or questioned myself over was, should I have nagged her more and really made her go get that mole checked out sooner? I knew I couldn't. She was living in Miami. I was in Baltimore. I could get on the phone and talk to her, but there's a limit to, I couldn't have dragged her into the dermatologist's office, but still you have those questions, and yeah, you blame yourself. The thing that bothered, on the other flip side, the thing that bothered my daughter most was when she would tell people she had melanoma and they'd say, it's just skin cancer. It's not just skin cancer.
Yeah, I'm curious. Raise your hand if someone had ever said that to you during, yeah, we hear that a lot. Christine, though, how did you overcome that? Like, how did it click that you're not responsible for this? Like, we're all just living our lives, yeah.
Well, I guess with that and a lot of stuff, I realized quickly as a caregiver, and my daughter was pretty, as I say, for 6 years she lived a pretty normal life in between scans and doctor's appointments and occasional surgeries and things like that. And so I was just kind of part of the support team, moral support. For the last 6 months, I was actually living with her. In July of 2011, she was diagnosed. She went in for routine scans, and they included a brain scan and found 3 brain lesions. She was on a BRAF trial at that time, and she was pulled from that trial. It was part of the trial protocol that if you had brain lesions, you couldn't be on the trial. So as soon as she stopped taking the BRAF inhibitor, the melanoma went wild. It just spread very, very quickly. She developed a tumor in her low back that left her in a wheelchair. And so from that time on, she was in New Hampshire at the time. I moved to New Hampshire and was living with her. And between her and her husband, her husband and I were her primary caregivers. So during that time, the need to be supportive and the need to deal with my own feelings, was a challenge. So, and I think this is true for anybody who's a caregiver. You're not only dealing with the challenges that the person you love is facing, you're dealing with your own fears, your own anger, your own feelings of guilt, and you have to have some place to put that. I'm a yoga teacher and a yoga practitioner, so for me it was my yoga mat. I would try and find some time every day to hit that mat, and all the tears and all the fears and all the frustrations would just stay on that mat. So it was the yoga and meditation for me, but I think everybody needs to find something that's your own, and some way of dealing with your own baggage. Otherwise, you're either going to try and be the person who's in control or be such an emotional wreck that the person you're caring for is going to feel like they need to care for you, and you don't want that.
I'd say, blame is a little, definitely felt blame. Mucosal melanoma, of course, they say, well, it's not caused by the sun exposure, and then you're like, well, what the hell did I do? Because I don't really know. And I think that I was searching for something to blame, like searching back in my history, what could I have possibly done to cause this? And it's just a natural way to, I feel like, kind of want to make some sense of things. And I think having a cause that you can point your finger at in some ways is actually nice, because a cause makes you feel like you can prevent or you can help other people. And I do think that, a lot of mucosal patients and myself, we're looking to find that maybe, see if we can figure that out so we can keep people from experiencing this. But I think the blame is hard to step away from, but it's not helpful, at the end of the day.
And I don't really feel like I had blame. For the first year, I had a lot of people telling me, well, you used a tanning bed for a few years, and if you had a bad burn on your ankle, maybe it translated to your toe. And I was like, that's a stretch, but okay. I really didn't blame myself, I guess. My mom was a redhead. She always put sunscreen on us. As an adult, I could count on one hand the number of times I had a really bad sunburn. However, I had been on immunosuppressants for about 20 years, and that could be a risk factor. It's one of those concerns of all the medications I've been on for an autoimmune disease. I always was like questioning the doctors on it, and they said, don't worry. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it also kept my disease at bay at the time, so it was a good thing.
And another perfect transition. So if the last 2 years have taught us anything, it's that uncertainty is hard. We all struggle with it. And how did you manage the many unknowns, the uncertainties that are an inherent part of a melanoma journey? How did you take care of yourself?
I think uncertainty is really challenging, and that all cancer patients and all, caregivers and all providers, we face that every day. I think that the way that you manage that is very dependent on your own personal style. However, I think that finding something grounding can be the most helpful thing. So whatever that is for you, whether that's physically standing and grounding yourself, or yoga, or just reminding yourself of your family or your values, or something small that kind of grounds you back to day-to-day life. Gardening, literally in the ground, I feel like that can be really helpful. Just finding something that helps you connect back to what you can control. It's smaller and it's physically present in your life right now.
In the last 2 years, I would say focus on what you can focus on. Try not to worry about what you cannot control, and really do the things that bring you pleasure.
And as we've all been experiencing this afternoon, the melanoma community is absolutely full of some of the most powerful and supportive people that I've ever met. How have you found the broader community, or tapped in, or found a way to give back?
I think maybe it's 2 years after my diagnosis, I was kind of frustrated with the lack of information out there about acral, and I created a Facebook group. Just, there aren't that many of us. It affects 2 to 3% of people with melanoma, and it's been 4 years now, I think, and we have 150 people, patients and caregivers on there, and it just feels like such a community. And also the melanoma exchange that we can go to communicate with other people who also have these rare cancers. It just felt like I was in a sea of people with the cutaneous melanoma, and then nobody really understood the subtype, and finding people who understand the subtype along with you, it just is really a great feeling.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. Someone else had already created a Facebook group for mucosal melanoma. It started out as caregivers and patients. And before I found that, it was very, very isolating. And finding that group was just very helpful. It felt like people got it, even though we were all facing similar uncertainties and similar questions. Having that community has been wonderful. And then, through the Melanoma Research Alliance, and we're developing this registry for the mucosal and acral community, that I can see the potential for that to be just this even broader, more connected community, and reaching out to patients in hospitals and kind of catching more people, because Facebook is somewhat limited and you only get the people that happen to search for it. But it has been hugely helpful in just connecting to people that are going through something similar, and now that are just starting, and kind of mentoring the people that are coming through.
I didn't really find a support community until after the fact. After we lost Rebecca, we wanted to find some way to keep her memory alive. So her family and friends and I started a small foundation in her memory. And the first year was great. We had all kinds of support. Second year, it gets a little tougher. And I thought, well, maybe I need to kind of look for some melanoma organization, that I could kind of connect to, that maybe could help me out a little bit. And Googled and found Melanoma Research Alliance. Gave them a call, and they were like warm and welcoming. This was like in March, so it was right after the scientific retreat. The person I talked to said, "Oh, you just missed our scientific retreat, but we'll get you on the mailing list and we'll invite you next year." And I went next year and, found this wonderful community. And then the other thing that happened as a result of MRA was that I was on a mailing list, and about a year after I originally made contact, Neil Spiegler from the Mid-Atlantic region, who also has a small foundation, was looking to connect small foundations throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. So I was invited to a meeting of about 7 foundations throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, and we got together, and what we found was we were support in practical terms for each other's foundations, but we were also, pretty much all of us were people who had lost somebody to melanoma. There were a few survivors as well, and there was a real sense of community, of supporting each other personally as well. So that was the beginning of the Melanoma Action Coalition, which is still going strong. We've got about 43 foundation members now, and about a dozen individual advocates who are part of us. And we still, I think, are not just support for each other in practical organizational ways, but very much a personal support community as well.
Yeah, and I also know that there's people here who are newer to the melanoma community who maybe have recently started treatment. This is all, I'm sure, very overwhelming to them. What would you say to them? Like, what do you want those folks to hear?
Not all dermatologists are created equal. So, so if you're going to a dermatologist, if you're going to an oncologist, find the ones who specialize in melanoma, preferably ones that are connected to a large research center and really can get you access to clinical trials, get you access to the best treatment available.
And if you've always been able to rely on your gut before, rely on your gut with your treatment. If something feels great, then that's great. And if something feels off, question it.
Yeah, I'll echo that too. I think, providers are superheroes for sure, but they're also humans, and to, remember that, and that it's okay to question and get second opinions. And also, I think finding community, I wish I had done that earlier. So, maybe if you're here and that's something you're early to, you have already found a community, which is wonderful. But if someone hasn't, I would highly recommend that they had.
And now we're going to shift gears a little bit and invite audience questions and discussion. I know that this is a topic kind of living with and how to make the best of it that I think resonates with everyone. So I highly encourage. We have quite a bit of time left. So, and I think Renee is in the back with a microphone.
Hi, thank you. Very good panel. I'm from the National Cancer Institute, and I was wondering how you might recommend getting the voice of the patient in more of the scientific or business conferences. I know that it's on the increase. It's a good idea. How do we get it from a promising trend to a regular practice?
I've been involved in some research-related patient advocacy opportunities over the last couple of years. It's been very rewarding. I would say, the earlier you can get patients involved in the process of research and science, the better. And I guess the amount of respect that they feel within that process is very important. If the patient community is feeling respected and heard, then they will continue to come and follow and be involved and, reach out to their own community to be more involved too. And I think that will grow.
I'm not really sure how to completely get involved. I know I've done some things, and it's more I've reached out to the organizations to be able to do something, or the organization I'm already volunteering with has asked me to help with and do something with some government research stuff. So working with the organizations for melanoma would be the way I would say to get patients involved.
Yeah, we have often had requests for our members to be on patient panels, and so reaching out to an organization like ours would be a good way to reach out to patients to recruit them.
And I think the thing that I would add is that I think patients are incredibly willing and they want to be involved. However, they're not in a position to create a door. So we as the nonprofit organizations, the government agencies, we need to create those opportunities, and then we need to make them accessible. And Mary has a question right here.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think really is important for at least some subpopulation of patients is access to the latest research. I'm wondering if Melanoma Research Alliance could put together a library of patient-accessible papers that are the latest and greatest, because many of the times you see things that are relatively old and not very promising, right? And you have to really dig. You have to learn how to dig in the literature in order to find things that, might tell you, gee, what they did for me was really good, and maybe they were really aware of stuff, but they never explained it to me, right? But I like to know what's going on, and so having a library would really help. I think that's that would be a very useful addition if you have the time or effort to do something like that.
So I guess I can tackle that. So MRA, we do cover a lot of emerging research trends. We do a lot of patient-friendly articles where we provide synopsis and then talk about how that applies to a typical melanoma journey, or what are the implications to patients today. All of that information is on our website. So for example, Dr. Amaria spoke of the DREAM sequence study, DREAM-seq. We did interview the PI for that study and had him explain the findings and what it means. He also recorded a video for us and talking through what that means for patients today. So those resources do exist in some way. I'm sure we can do better and need to be doing better. There are also other sources of great information online, and I'm curious if you all want to highlight anything where you see high quality patient resources for the melanoma community.
I don't know. I kind of was the one doing the deep dive that she was saying was difficult, but I had research experience, so I was able to do that. But yes, I think had I not had that background, having a very easy, accessible thing absolutely would be helpful.
And I've gone to the organization website and looked at things there, and I've also just plain Googled, but I look at things that are published by the government, that are now I'm drawing a blank on what the abbreviations are, but things from the National Institute of Health and National Cancer Institute, and there's something else that's a government entity. I'm looking at those, and while I might look at something from 10 years ago and say, okay, that's 10 years ago, I'm more looking for something that's current.
That's great.
I just have a quick follow-on to the previous question about how to get patients more involved in the research. Where I'm from, the congressionally directed medical research programs, a lot of our programs are actually building into our funding opportunities requirements that the funded investigator have in some way, to various degrees, patients involved in the research project. So whether they're informing the question that's being asked or just something to that effect. And so in that way, if you make it a requirement, then the investigators have to figure out how to do it if they want the money. But then we give them resources. We're like, okay, we're telling you that you need to do this. Here's where you can go find the patients. So a lot of, especially if they're more PhD level and maybe aren't used to the clinical and dealing with patients, well, how are they going to get connected? And so we try to provide them with some of those resources. So that's one way to also deal with that.
And Amy, I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you feel comfortable what's the 30-second primer on CDMRP? And why
Certainly.
does it matter to our community?
Certainly, not a problem. That's why I'm here. So no, I am the program manager for the melanoma research program at CDMRP. And
what is CDMRP?
The congressionally directed medical research programs. And so we fall under the DoD. And
what is the DoD?
I thought that was an acronym everyone would be familiar with.
3-letter acronyms. The DC is full of them.
The Department of Defense. And so we do fund biomedical research under the Department of Defense. And we have 37 programs, one of them being the melanoma research program. And one of the things that really we say makes us stand out from other government funding agencies or other funding agencies in general is that we really have patient advocates, consumers as we call them. So if you go look at our website, go look for consumers. And we have them involved in all aspects of our processes. So from our vision setting and helping us set our priorities to the grant review panels. I know there are several of you who have participated in those panels in the audience today. So that's what we do. That's what we try to And again, all of our programs try to focus on what are the needs of the patient communities and where can we fill the existing gaps and niches, because we're not the NIH, we're much smaller, but we still feel that there are very important things that we can fill.
Yeah. And I think David had a question behind you.
First of all, I think you guys did great. I think you covered just about everything. And to answer this gentleman's question over here from the Cancer Institute, everybody in this room has got a story. And Cody, I believe, has probably written something on everybody in this room and published it in your publication. And all you have to do, no matter what type of cancer somebody has, whether it's melanoma or something else, get them to tell you their story, and if you feel comfortable with it and they feel comfortable with it, publish it. And there was another question over here asking for information regarding places to go for different treatments and attitudes and so on. There is a magazine that I subscribe to online and in hard copy that's free. It's called Cure, where it talks about everything cancer, whether it's melanoma or breast cancer and so on. And those are my comments, and thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And Pat?
I'm going to go over here first, and then I'll come back. Hi, I just have a comment. Another good place to find research opportunities, there's a company, an organization called Find Me Cure. It's findmecure.org. They're attempting to create a patient-friendly clinicaltrials.gov. So that's a good place to go. And they started with oncology. So there's a lot of oncology studies on that platform with information that's easily digestible by the layperson, unlike clinicaltrials.gov, where you have to know if you're allergic to mouse hormones or not before you know if you're eligible for something. But and then also that is a fantastic gap pointed out that we could help, that our industry partners could help us with. When you have information about your trials, about your treatments, if you provide patient-friendly summaries to the advocates and the advocacy groups, then you're allowing us to help amplify your message, and you're allowing us to spread your information by word of mouth to our trusted, people that in communities that we work within. So that is another way to help engage with the patients, is providing that patient-friendly information. Yeah, it was called Find Me Cure. Yes.
Okay. Christine, quick question for you, and maybe for the others too. Please chime in. As a caregiver, and I'm a caregiver, we all know that there are challenges, many challenges that we face, sometimes more than the patient does. All right. Any little tidbits or comments that you can make on how to make it a little bit easier? Did you do a good job at taking care of yourself so you didn't have as much stress?
I think if you possibly can, be sure that you're not alone being a caregiver. Yeah, I was very fortunate in that, during that intensive part of caregiving, the last 6 months of Rebecca's life, I was there with her husband, and we spelled each other. I could be there while he went out and got groceries. He was there while I could hit my yoga mat. So if you don't feel as if you're the only person there, if you can find somebody to spell you, I think that really helps a lot. Yeah, and again, just I reiterate, find something that's yours, and try and find some time during the day to just take time for yourself, so that you've got time to deal with all the baggage that you're dealing with, and can kind of leave it in that place. And what you find is as variable as you are. Some people just need to take a walk out in nature. Some people need to hit the yoga mat. Some people have a circle of friends they can go to. There are support groups. I never, took advantage of that when I was a caregiver, but support groups and peer supports are out there. There are all kinds of supports. It's just a matter of what works for you. And the trick is finding that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
If I can add on to that, my mom had had a stroke before she passed away from a recalcitrant cancer. And after she was able to come home, Dad was pretty stressed out, and we lived 5 hours away, so we weren't there all the time. But I had gone to the pharmacy with him one time, and there was a card there for like a local angels group that their purpose was to relieve caregivers for an hour or 2 or 3. And Dad had not known about that. So I guess my thing would be to make sure, see if your local pharmacy has information, or maybe your local at-home visiting nurses might have some information on being able to take a break from the care. Just because you're the caregiver doesn't mean you have to do it 24/7. You need to take time for yourself as well to keep yourself healthy.
And I have the PS to that. Prior to being a patient, I had a home care business taking care of the elderly. And we had a lot of hospice cases, and I learned so much from all my clients. And one of the things that I've always told the families is you can hire a caregiver, but you cannot hire a wife, a daughter, a mother. So some of those tasks that you have, see if you can get help with those so that you can give to your loved one what they need from you. They don't need you to be cleaning toilets. They need you to be sitting there reminiscing with them and being with them, because you're the only person in the world that can do that for them. And I know I'm from Massachusetts. Go to your senior centers, because they have resources available for those that might not have the assets. Go to the American Cancer Society. They will have resources. They have housekeeping that'll come in and help it. Take those chores off your plate and spend that time, because this year, my motto is make memories. And that's what you need to do the most for your loved ones as a caregiver.
Thank you.
I have a question over here.
Well, it's not really a question, and Cody knows me. I want to add to the lady that just said go to the American Cancer Society. I worked for them for 5 years. And the thing about the American Cancer Society, their resources are reliable. They've been around for 110 years. They provide hope lodges for people that want to transfer to get treatment in another city. They provide free transportation. You can call them 24/7, 7 days, 365 days a year. They're available. They have patient navigators that were oncology nurses. They can help you go through the financial. They can get you to support groups that if I need somebody just to come in, they know the area, where you live, what they reach out to. They are one of the most reliable, and they also provide a lot of money for clinical trials with anybody. And if you are confused about a clinical trial, they will sit with you with your diagnosis and help you filter through for you to go to the institution where you go. I mean, if you're not in an area by a research hospital, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get to. So a lot of people don't want to do it because they don't know how to get to it. But when you have an institution that is very reliable, that you can feel that you've got the right support, and the Melanoma Research Alliance is one of the big ones for information for things like that. And I think when people talk resources when you're a patient, it gives you strength. It gets you that strength to say, I can make these decisions with some help with people that have got the knowledge about what I need. And I'm done.
Thank you, Colleen. I think we have time for one more question.
One of the other sources for the caregivers and help is social media and your Facebook page. I live in a small town, and we all stay connected through a local city Facebook page and a neighborhood web page. And most of the churches also monitor theirs, and neighbors are really quick. If they have spare time, your neighbors are always looking to help neighbors.
Thank you. And then before we move on, I just wanted to ask each of you just one more question, and that is, What do you know today that you wish you knew from day one, if you could go back in time and whisper in your own ear?
I wish I had known about melanoma-specific oncologists from the get-go.
I wish I had just known that it was going to be okay.
I think I would wish that I had known that stage 1 melanoma is pretty curable, and that early detection and getting to a dermatologist early and getting a correct diagnosis early could make a real difference.
That's great. All right, so thank you everybody for a great panel. I want to thank each of you for being so forthcoming about your own experiences. I know this isn't always something that people get an opportunity to talk about so openly, and it might not always be the easiest thing to talk about so openly. So I really want to thank you for sharing that expertise, and let's give them a great round of applause.